virtual meeting. Let the record show that Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Wingard, Councillor Robertson, and myself are present. Let's jump right into it. The first topic is reporting on planning board recommendations related to the proposed land use ordinance amendment regulating solar energy systems. So Kyle, I'll let you have the floor.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. So the council committee a couple months ago sent the solar energy systems draft ordinance to the planning board for its public hearing and recommendation and review. The planning board actually had 2 meetings on it. Our March meeting at the planning board, only 4 members were able to attend that meeting, which is about half the board. And there were a few comments at that time, so they wanted to bring it back in April. And that's, when they, the full board got to see it and kind of finish up their recommendations. So there were only 4 recommendations, and I think they were fairly small each, but certainly worth considering. So I'll just run through those real quick. The first one had to do with the level of permitting for large-scale systems in the university district. There's an existing standard in our ordinance where certain uses that take place on the campus, if they're within 500 feet of College Ave or the university boundary, they require site plan review. But if they're more than 500 feet away, it requires just a building permit. So some uses in the university district go by that standard, while others go by more traditional, either just a permit or site plan, and that's it. But after, I think, 1 public comment and then some discussion with the board, they agreed that once you get up to that large scale system scale of things, that it made sense to just go straight to site plan review, as that would be a pretty big project at that point, which I thought was, consistent with other larger scale uses that are identified in the land use ordinance. Second was an adjustment to some language to the height standards on page 3 in section 3A. This was mostly to clear up the language. The board thought it didn't flow necessarily super well, where it was talking about accessory uses and principal uses, and that would require someone using the ordinance to go back to section 1 to kind of figure out which systems were accessory and which systems were principal. So we laid it out more as, large scale systems in these districts go by this height standard. All other ground mounted systems go by this other standard. So hopefully that would clarify and make it more readable. And then the last 2 recommendations by the board were mostly to kind of bring some extra detail and make the language a little bit less vague. The first was in section 4E. It originally talked about not removing a significant volume of topsoil for a large scale or medium scale system. And, if that goes to the board's concern was, well, who's determining what significant volume of topsoil is? How is that determination made? Which I thought was a pretty valid point. The planning board shouldn't necessarily be the ones that has to make that decision on a case-to-case basis. So we had a similar standard in our earthwork ordinance language, where projects could be reviewed by the Penobscot County Soil and Water Conservation District if the planning board chose to require that, if they thought that extra level of review was needed. So we added some similar language here that would give the planning board the ability to do that. However, if the project didn't look like it would be removing a lot of soil, the board wouldn't have to require an applicant to go through that process. It would just be sort of there if they needed it. So the board was okay with that once we brought that back. And the last was, excuse me, the idea of kind of promoting accessory systems, ground mounted systems to the side and the rear of people's lots rather than in the front yard to reduce the potential for impacts on the street. The board again wanted to kind of clear up a little bit of the vagueness and to clarify why what conditions might exist that would lead someone to needing to put a system in the front yard. So that's why we added some language based on topography or other natural conditions or the placement of existing structures on the lot that might force someone, the only place they can put it is in the front of their lot. And then finally, just added a little more language that the applicant in that situation would have to screen to the extent practicable. The board was concerned that if you just said they have to screen the system, that you could screen to the point that the system wasn't able to function as it was supposed to. And what we're really trying to do here is promote the use of solar and allow people to do that sort of activity so that would give the board some room, or the code officer, if he was the one permitting it, would give some flexibility in the level of screening in that situation. Those were the only comments. So obviously, any comments that you have on that, or those were just recommendations by the planning board, so they could change or stay.
Are there any questions from people? Cheryl?
Yeah, so Kyle, would the removal of topsoil be for balance? I mean, would it be the reason to remove the topsoil would be to kind of level out the panels? Would that be what they would do?
Yeah, I
Is
think
that the
so.
reason, I guess?
Yeah, if there had to be some, leveling just to make it more manageable to put it in.
Okay. All righty.
And I
Thank you.
think the idea is
Yeah.
that sometimes agricultural areas can be used for these larger scale systems. So you want to avoid taking away too much soil specifically in those areas if they're
Right.
to be used for agriculture uses again down the road.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for Kyle about it? No? Yeah, Kyle, my thing was, I'm glad as you clarified, I do, when I looked at the thing about like front lots or the front of the lot, I get what the intent is, but if that's the spot where the sun hits it all the time, for that reasoning, that makes sense. So,
Right.
So where do we go from here though? Do we take it to the next step to kind of like agree with this, or?
Yeah, so the next step would be a council public hearing and setting, calling that public hearing and then going through the public hearing and adoption process if there were no further recommended changes.
Great.
That process, Terry, would normally include calling the hearing in June for July, and holding the meeting in July. Sometimes council frowns upon moving things forward in the summer months, but where we're on Zoom, it would seem that those who are interested don't necessarily have to be in Orono to participate. So I would recommend us moving it forward so that we can clearly meet the moratorium and not limit and not have to extend.
I would agree. The fellow councilors, do you have anything?
I agree. I would approve to move forward.
Laura?
Yep. I just was going to ask if you're looking for a motion to move it forward.
No, we don't need to motion that yet. Jeff, you're okay with moving this forward?
Yeah, I think it's excellent, and I appreciate the revisions. Thanks.
There is one other small typo that I noticed on my end. So it should be section 18-154. And in one place it still says 153. So I'll just update that prior to it going forward.
Great.
Ta-
Sophie?
Terry, before we move on and Kyle goes home, which he has most certainly earned this week, I just want to recognize all of Kyle's work. Last night, the planning board met and permitted our first retail marijuana establishment. And, you know, Kyle makes it look easy, but he and Dave Mylan did a tremendous amount of heavy lifting to get the ordinance in place and to figure out how to shepherd people through the process. And just really want to acknowledge a job incredibly well done.
Yeah, as
I
always.
watched the meeting. Oh, sorry, Terry.
no,
I
go ahead,
watched
go
the
ahead.
meeting and it was smooth and like all the questions were answered and it was well done. And the planning board did a good job too. Sorry to interrupt, Terry.
No, you're good. I know, just goes to say that this is why we are very lucky to have the individuals that we have that are working for the town. We're just lucky to have the best people. So thank you, Kyle.
Can I add
Thanks, everyone.
to that is that the Pharaohs have been waiting for us and wanted to be in Orono and knew that Orono was a good place for them. So yeah, so good. Thank you, Kyle.
Great. So moving on, we'll move on to item number 3, discussion of repealing or amending the town's emergency ordinance mandating face coverings and large residential complex planning related to COVID-19. Sophie's issue.
This is me. So back in August, as students were coming back to campus and the COVID transmissions were kind of taking off, council heard from members in the community, I think predominantly folks who were older, who were really nervous about public health. And they asked us to step in, even though the state wasn't moving as quickly to mandate face masks. At that point, they were required in establishments, I think, of over, it's either 5,000 or 15,000 square feet. I mean, large establishments. And the other concern that was raised was the number of students that would be coming back, especially those living in congregate housing. And what we were seeing was the university having a very overt and very stringent approach to bringing people back to campus safely. And there was some real concern about what was going to happen in those large shared living environments. So the ordinance that you adopted addresses the requirement that that individuals must wear face coverings indoors in public buildings. And also requires large residential housing complexes to have plans in place and follow them, not just have them, but follow them, related to mitigating the risks associated with COVID-SARS-2. So we adopted this emergency ordinance, which has kind of stayed in place, and the state followed on not long after that. So our ordinances kind of run under what the state was already requiring and required more for those large congregate housing facilities. With the recent updated guidance from CDC saying that fully vaccinated individuals no longer have to wear face coverings indoors or outdoors, except in some very narrowly defined situations. The state is rolling back their requirements. So we will be in a position on Monday, the 24th, of having a rule that is more stringent than the state. The town has received, staff has been fielding some questions and concerns about that. I have sent you the emails that we've received, 3 of them from businesses. We also have Renee Olette on at the meeting as an attendee, she's the CEO of the president of the University Credit Union. And she can express, I think, very eloquently her concern if you would like to talk with her. But we are here to see, yes.
I just had a question. You, I understand the state has lifted. Has is UMaine aligning with the state and CDC?
We know that UMaine is loosening some of their requirements, like you don't have to wear a mask on campus anymore. With the students, the students have left campus, so we're not having the routine EOC meetings, and I'm not getting the routine updates. But we can most definitely kind of figure out talk with UMaine and get their timeline for change. I will tell you that when we implemented this ordinance, we had grant funding that helped us enforce it and to give education around it and to spend time trying to help people comply. That grant funding is no longer here. So I think we just want to also keep in mind the staff, how we can support a regulation that's in place. So I reached out to Roger Huber. This emergency ordinance is the first time in 20 years that I've actually had to use emergency municipal powers. So I'm a newbie. And what I learned is that in order to repeal this ordinance, we have to enact an ordinance that repeals the ordinance. And it goes through a regular ordinance process. So it will take 10 days notice, a public hearing with 10 days notice, and you guys can hear public comment at that point. You could adopt the ordinance or at least act on the ordinance that night because it's not a land use ordinance. So this would be something that we likely would do on June 14th formally. Council could give me you could make a recommendation to the full council. This committee you could give me some guidance about whether or not we're gonna, what the messaging should be.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts of like what are you feeling out in the community based on people that you've talked to?
I've been out and about, and people are unmasked and are kind of telling each other, I've been fully vaccinated, I'm okay. And a lot of places, of course, and I'm only talking about greenhouses right now, like with big, open spaces and things like that. But even I've been into some little stores up in Washington County and stuff, and people are asking and being, they're saying that people are being dishonest, but for what I've seen, for the most part, people are asking, are you fully vaccinated? And they're saying yes. And I think we need to go with the state and lift our ordinance, and however we need to do it, and as quickly as we need to do it. I'm in favor of changing that emergency ordinance.
I agree. I think we should align with the state. I think the reason I asked that question about UMaine was just like if they still had dorms open, which I guess over the summer it's not relevant, then would we want to consider something in the congregate housing facilities? But I think summer I think we put it all aside at this point.
Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I've talked to a number of people who work in small businesses, and they're honestly, from the employee perspective, quite relieved that they're no longer in an enforcement role, and they'd like to just get back to doing business. So if the state says it's safe and we get good guidance from them, I'm 100% willing to follow that model.
Lori?
I'm completely supportive of repealing it.
It would be remiss if I didn't say that I think that people need to get vaccinated for the health of our community. So I just need to say that.
So for me personally, I'm actually not in your camp, sorry. Because what I'm hearing, and this is all, it's just my own personal thing. What I'm hearing also is there is a huge segment of our population, number one, who didn't get vaccinated. Is there a thought of should there be a percent once we are at a percent that we say, okay? I know a lot of people who have restaurants, like last year when we dealt with, unfortunately, our fellow counselor Meg having an employee get spit on because of a mask. They don't want to be put in a place of having to be responsible for monitoring that. However, it was brought to me from a handful of people that they felt like there's the kids are being really left out of this. We have a very large segment of kids that will not be able to get a vaccine for some time now. We don't know what that's going to look like, I guess. But so is it a thing where you say walk into when you're out and about in our community? Definitely, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. But if you walk into a facility, we'll use Meg's place, the Common Loon, and they say, we just want you to wear your mask until you get to your seat. Take it off, enjoy your meal, have a good time. Is it too hard to say that? So I kind of I just want to put it there to kind of get your guys' thoughts to see. I know that people are on board with wanting to do this, but my exposure to some people has been like they're uncomfortable. So
I think, Terry, I think that's a good point. And I think private businesses like restaurants and things like that can still do their own enforcement. Like they can, if they're nervous and if they want people to wear masks, I think that's up to them. I really do. I think that's, and I have my mask with me always. It's always with me. And if they say you need, we're more comfortable with you wearing a mask, and bringing it, walking to the table and taking it off at the table, I have no problem with that. I think private businesses are, I support them and what and how they feel safe. And I want them to feel safe. So, until we transition into this, back to normal thing, I feel like they have every right to say, this is how we would like to conduct business. And of course, I'm probably one of the more, I will comply with them. I'm not going to spit on anybody. So not that I know of anyway. But
I think that's
yeah.
what the part of it, the issue came up was because if the town says go and they choose to not go, are they setting themselves up for a problem dealing with patrons?
What do you mean by the town says go?
So you guys are all made a comment saying like we should like be okay to not have to wear masks. So if we as a council say no, we're good, you don't have to wear masks. If a business chooses to not follow that guidelines, they want to have stricter things, are we putting them in a position, and this came up, of they don't want to have to monitor and somebody gets mad because it said, well, the town now doesn't have this ordinance and you can't do that. So I'm just putting this out there saying, I get where you guys are coming from. These people may not be in the same space, but they don't want to be the one responsible for dealing with this stuff. So yeah, comments. Lori.
Thank you. Well, when we had the vote originally, I didn't realize, somehow I missed that we got funding to help support us in administering this. I just originally did not vote for this because I didn't want there to be a drain on our, or have it fall onto our staff to have to be in some kind of enforcement mode. And so I go with the public health information, and therefore when I say I would vote in favor of us removing the ordinance, it doesn't mean I expect people to be rude, and I want people to follow the public health guidance that is by the state. The Bangor Daily News 2 days ago put out a map that showed by town the amount of vaccinations, and Hampden is at 72% and Bangor is at 65.8%, and Orono is less than 50% vaccinated. So Orono is at 47%. So we are standing out among the towns around us, and you go north of us, Old Town, Milford's at 53.6 and Old Town's at 55.3. And so we as Orono town councilors, I applaud Laura, Councilor Mitchell's statement. I would encourage people to get vaccinated. And clearly when we have patrons of our business people who are being rude to the staff and putting their lives in jeopardy, that is a problem. But I don't know that us making an ordinance that's more strict than the state is going to fix that problem.
Laura?
Sophie, go ahead first.
I was just gonna speak to the data. I don't have inside information on the data that Bangor Daily News is using. However, it would stand to reason that it might be something along the people who are vaccinated, what town they claim they're from, divided by your census population. And in Orono, our students are gone and perhaps not declaring themselves from Orono. So I'm not sure that that's a valid number.
Good point.
I definitely hear your concerns, Terry, and I've read a number of kind of public health and medical articles about this being a concerning move, but it's the national and state move. So I feel like we should go along. I feel like what this creates is an environment of personal choice and caring for your own health. And I have little kids that are, you know, have potential high risk category and are not able to be vaccinated. Am I going to be taking them into a restaurant? No, I'm not. So I'll get takeout, but like, I mean, I feel like that's the stage that has been set. And I don't think Orono should kind of not get in line with that. I'm not saying it's a great situation for all circumstances, but it is what it is. So that's where I land on this.
Jeff?
I just want to point out that two of the comments that Sophie received via email asked the town to consider, these are businesses that have multiple locations. And then, you know, one of the comments was, well, this is our policy except for Orono. And sometimes we hear that except for Orono a lot, and it has led us to sort of develop a reputation as maybe not the most open and business friendly environment. And I think we are very focused on economic development, and I really want to work to dispel that idea rather than reinforce that idea.
I think it's a good
But
point.
I also have to say too, that this is a healthcare issue, but you know, talking what Laura said, we can't be more stringent or more strict than the state is. So I'm still in favor of lifting that ordinance.
Great. So, Sophie, moving on. So, it seems a consensus is to kind of proceed with what the state and federal requirements are. I just want to be on record that I'm still cautious about this. I'm not really sure. But the consensus is that we move this. So does this move on to the next council meeting? And yeah.
What I would suggest is that I work at writing an ordinance that repeals, and it seems to me that it would make sense to repeal it all. And if when we get back to the school year starting, and if we're still dealing with COVID, that we could look at the shared congregate housing if there are concerns there. But I would suggest that I just go ahead and notice a public hearing and do the most simple ordinance that I can that simply repeals everything wholesale. If that works for you, and then you would consider it, of course. My one question is, you know, we have businesses that need to give guidance to their employees, and as a town, I just don't know if we want to take a very passive approach on this ordinance, knowing that likely we're going to repeal it and not and just let people give guidance that follows the state. I don't know what you think about that, because technically it's not
I
following the ordinance.
I hear. I would have a big problem with that. I mean, we're the ones who put the ordinance in. I don't want these people thrown to their own devices. I think that we have to be very calculated on how we approach to make sure that we do not leave our businesses, the ones that are obviously concerned even more so, by themselves. So yeah, I think that's something we definitely have to look at.
So Terry, are you saying that the town not enforces like hardcore, but like maintains the ordinance as is until June 14th, when the council has the opportunity to fully repeal it?
Well,
Like,
I think we have to do that. I'm not sure, but I think we have to, right, Sophie?
So the ordinance is the ordinance. Whether I am actively enforcing it is, I'm technically not doing my job, but I'm just trying to figure out where you guys want me.
I mean, I would rather have the entire council there to be able to do this. I just think it's more appropriate. I think, we have two other counselors who are not here. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so does it make sense that our language back to businesses is that we anticipate that this will be repealed on June 14th? However, there's a process.
Correct. I feel more
Okay.
comfortable with that process, just to make sure the other counselors are in with us.
Yep. Can absolutely do that.
Lori?
So what would it look like? I mean, I think that if there's an ordinance, then we have to say that it's in effect until it's not, and therefore between now and June 14th is in effect. What does it look like for you to enforce it?
To be blunt, I would move to a complaint driven, which is where we've kind of been. And I would not be asking staff to generate staff complaints on it after the 24th.
Meaning, so when you say complaint driven, someone calls into your staff and makes a complaint. And in the past, what did your staff do? And after the 24th, what will your staff do?
So if somebody calls in and makes a complaint, we are going to follow up on the complaint. Most of the time that we would do education, we would take face masks to businesses so that they had a stack to give out. And we would document that. We, in the past, would also go back to the business a couple of times just to spot check to make sure that we were seeing more compliant behavior. My suggestion at this point is if we have a complaint, we'll go remind them that the ordinance is in effect until June 14th, and make sure that they have plenty of disposable face masks to hand out. But I guess the difference being, if I drive by a business and see people without a mask inside, I am not going to pick up the phone and generate a complaint where I would have previously.
Thank you. Actually, you guys have been really good about that, Sophie. When people have inquired in the past, when it was more so new, about dealing with places that people felt or it wasn't being followed. So is there any other questions? We're good with moving this forward. Oh, go ahead.
I actually just wanted to interrupt and ask if I could, since we were ending this one, if I could briefly bring something up that was going to be in my manager's report, because Renee Olette is here and it has to do with UCU.
Sure.
Would that be all right? And Belle, can you bring Renee up? And I will admit, I'm putting Renee on the spot. And so if she doesn't like it, she'll probably just keep her video off, but I want to give her the opportunity to speak. So for people who might not be aware, the town and UCU have a pretty strong relationship. We partnered to create the redevelopment of the former Katahdin block after the building burned. The UCU bought a piece of land there, the town owns some land, and we actually erased all of our boundaries in that project and designed the building that you see today. That building is bigger than what UCU needed to headquarter their operation. But we really wanted a building that would kind of announce that you have arrived in the middle of Orono. So, you know, through our budget process and other that we've got some kind of mutual agreements back and forth. One of those agreements that we have related to making sure that the outside of the building was aesthetically compatible with downtown and the vision that we were trying to put forth. So there were some approvals that went back and forth. For example, UCU had quite a bit of say in how we designed the wall and what the wall material looked like and how the parking lots came about and kind of what the flow was going to be of those parking lots. And the town had considerable say in the exterior of the building, not the interior, not what they used it for, but just the visual of the exterior of the building. So the facade, I think would be the term we would want to use. So Renee contacted me because UCU is very excited with a new branding effort, and it's updated and it's fun and it's fresh and it's all the things that we love about UCU. But instead of beige, they're more gray and teal. And while we would all agree that teal building in the middle of our village might not quite work, the gray and shades of gray, which I think on that building, it's the shades, what we discovered is that different shading is kind of important because otherwise it will just look like a big block. I think gray is a color that fits very well. I went back and pulled the agreements, and it does talk about the town and UCU having to have some mutual agreement about the outside of the building. I don't want to ask Renee to stop her process and to go through a whole long process when I think we all agree that gray, light gray with some shaded contour will be beautiful on that building. And what I'd really like is just to be able to give her a written assurance that the town thinks that her plan is a good one. And I just want to, we have the opportunity, she is here, and kind of hoping we could move this forward. And by the way, this is Renee Olet. She's the president of University Credit Union. And she and I sat through lots of meetings with Rob Yerxa to design that space.
We sure did, Sophie. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Renee.
So we're just going from beige to gray.
With teal accents.
There wouldn't be any other colors, just a couple of different shades of gray other than the marketing that is on the building today. That would be it.
I think we can handle gray.
Very subtle. I've seen some renderings. It really does look nice. Some white trim, certainly, but I think it would fit in very nicely there in town.
I would go with the teal too, Renee. Just paint the whole,
A whole wall of it.
Sophie says no.
Well, it's wonderful to have that beautiful building in the downtown and to have had that block redeveloped for sure. I knew what that used to look like, and we're glad to have you there. Go
Thank
Gray.
We certainly appreciate that. And, you know, it's important for us for it to continue to look nice, and it's due for a fresh coat of paint, whether it's the existing color or a color that better aligns with our branding. So we appreciate that.
Great. Thank you, Renee. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So what I will plan to do is just send Renee a little letter that she can tuck away in case there's ever any question. And we will call this a job well done.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
I'm
you,
going
Renee.
to off now. Have a great rest of your evening.
Great. So we're going to move on now to item number 4, discussion of town adoption of land acknowledgements, which I understand our Councillor Wingard spent a lot of time on. So I'm going to pass it off to you.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I know we have a copy of this in our draft packet. I'm not sure if I have permissions to share my screen or whether it's necessary to share it. Okay, let me do that. And I believe this is it. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. This should be it. Draft Town of Orono Land Acknowledgement Statement. Are we all seeing that document? Okay, so this is part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, and really it's a preliminary step. I think it's a good first step, and it's certainly not the summation of all our work, right? So I want to say at first that in terms of the DEI work that we're doing, this is a place where we're starting as council, and the DEI committee and all the other work that's going on with staff and things like that are ongoing. So this is not the end point. This is a starting point, but I think this is a very important starting point because we live on the land, you know, and without a recognition of who else has lived on this land from time immemorial, we really have an incomplete picture of the culture and history that's developed here. So I was really gratified when I was asked to work on this, and I had a lot of help from other people as I did this. And in particular, I want to thank Darren Ranko, John Bear Mitchell, and John Banks, who gave me very specific and constructive feedback. And I also want to acknowledge that I reached out to many other people because I know there's a lot of voices in this conversation. Those 3 individuals were the people who made specific comments on this draft, but they're certainly not the only people that are sort of involved in this process and concerned about this process. So that being said, I took some sort of boilerplate language and sort of municipal statement language, and I looked at some documents that had been drafted by members of the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki Nations of Maine that had been adopted by the University of Maine and University of Maine Cooperative Extension and some other municipal land acknowledgement statements, and sort of combined some of that wording. And when I had a very preliminary draft, I sent it out to the people who'd volunteered to be reviewers and took their feedback and rewrote it. And I want to say we'll read through it really quickly, but there are at least 2 things that I think we should sort of discuss as a group before we send this forward to the full council. So one thing, the whereas statements are pretty straightforward. We recognize that Orono is located on the lands and waters and the homeland of the Penobscot people, where issues of water and territorial rights and the encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. In some of the language that I've read, the definition of whose homeland this is more expansive, to include other Wabanaki nations and other indigenous people. The feedback I received from one particular reviewer was that while it's true that all of Maine, and in fact all of North America, are indigenous territory, that Orono specifically is the homeland of the Penobscot people. And so I limited that language in this first whereas statement to indicate sort of the primacy of the Penobscot history on this land. So we could change that and broaden that into other language if you wanted to, but I really thought that that was a kind of poignant place for me to start, right? That it wasn't just in general that there were people here. In fact, it was my friends and neighbors from the Penobscot Nation who have been here for a long time. The other little editorial thing from this beginning section is that as our language around the Wabanaki Nations has developed, spellings have changed and the renderings of words in English have changed. And so there are other spellings of Maliseet and Micmac. These are the ones that are used in the University of Maine's Land Acknowledgement Agreement and also used in the 1980 Maine Indian Lands Claims Act. So although, for example, the spelling of Micmac is not the one that is most commonly used by Mi'kmaq people today, it is the language that we see most frequently in the law. So I decided to stay with those spellings, but if we receive feedback that they should be changed or they don't reflect best or current practices, we may want to think about changes on that. And I would encourage any public comment on that as well. The third whereas statement, whereas the town of Orono is the only municipality in Maine named for a Wabanaki leader and has a historic relationship with the Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki tribal nations, is also something unique to this statement. It is not something that is shared by statements from other municipalities or the University of Maine and its attendant institutions, because we are unique, right? Our identity as a place that has been a place with a historic experience has been shared with the Penobscot people, and specifically Chief Orono, is unique. And I think it's really important to have that piece in here. It's not to exclude, the importance of land acknowledgement statements to other communities, but it's to say how particularly important this land acknowledgement statement is to our community. So that's the preliminary part, right? So that sets the stage. And it sets what we recognize. So it said the town of Orono recognizes that the Penobscot Nation and other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. That is a given. We are not arguing that. We are not arguing about the sovereignty and the distinct powers of self-government that Wabanaki nations exercise over their land and their people. But in recognition of that, Orono ordains that we will act in the following ways. We act in recognition of and consultation with the Penobscot Nation and the Wabanaki tribal nations in cases of tribal sovereignty arising in the lands and waters of Orono. And I felt this was particularly important given the sort of assumption a couple of years ago that Orono would be, part of a lawsuit which was really against, it stood in opposition of many of the sovereignty claims of the Penobscot Nation. So I felt pretty strongly, and I'm glad our reviewers felt pretty strongly that this was appropriate to say that while we are bound by state and municipal law, right, we act in recognition of the sort of the moral and ethical positions of the Penobscot Nation. Yes, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, you were talking about history of a case and the assumption around Orono. I don't know what you're referring to.
Oh. Well, I should probably defer to Cheryl on this. But Orono was listed as, I believe, an amicus or a co-litigator in a suit that has the potential to deprive the Penobscot Nation of their authority to live and manage the waters of the Penobscot River.
They were actually listed as an intervener.
Yeah.
And Orono withdrew from that. It was 9 years ago. I know it feels like a couple of years ago, but it was almost 10 years ago. That suit is still ongoing. The state is suing, or the Penobscot Nation is suing the state right now, and it's in Supreme Court. That is an ongoing litigation. It's cost millions and millions of dollars to both the Penobscot Nation and the state of Maine taxpayers. And they filed a suit against, it was Mills at the time, Janet Mills. And then our AG now, I can't remember his name, but I know he's Aaron Fry. And so they're still pursuing it, but it was about tribal waters and the islands, and whether the islands actually were part of the water system, the Penobscot River. So that is still ongoing.
But I'm aware of that. I just didn't realize that Orono had a specific role in that.
Orono was listed as an intervener on the case, and the council at the time had their attorneys withdraw. They are still listed as an intervener on the docket. And so you have to bring it up every once, or I don't have to, but people have to bring it up that Orono and Bucksport also were listed as interveners, and Bucksport is also withdrawn their support of this. And it was under an assumption that Orono knew about it. They knew that they were listed as interveners, and they did not know that they were listed as interveners, which was a case across the state that municipalities and the mills and things along the river that are now defunct were listed in opposition to the Penobscot Nation. And so we've withdrawn from that. And I think Sophie was around then. So
Yeah, I was around for the withdrawing. There was an initial court action that had to do with wastewater discharge permits. And then we got through that part, and then it kind of ramped into this second iteration, which is where we got drawn in the second time. I hadn't been here for very long when we exited.
Right, it was about 9 years ago. Yeah, so you hadn't been here too long. But yeah, anyway, keep going, Jeff.
Did you have another question, Laura? I'm sorry.
I guess I'm just wondering, like, are we, like, we're not a part of that case. And so, so I'm just trying to be clear that we're not trying, like, were you referring back to that just as background? Or is there something in this that it all makes it references back to that? Like, I'm not seeing it, but I just I would prefer to look forward with this and not.
So I'm not trying to relitigate the case, and I don't think this statement is an attempt to put us in a particular legal position, but I really thought it was important to make the statement that moving from here on out, the actions of the town will be intentional in recognizing and consulting with the Penobscot Nation when it comes to issues that involve the land and the water that are the historic homeland of the Penobscot people. So this doesn't preclude us from taking any action in the future, and it doesn't make us take any action regarding a court case in the past. My hope was that it would make us be a little bit more intentional and thoughtful as we do our land planning and our long-term land use, lay out our long-term land use goals. And, this is a little bit away from this document, but, we recently had a conversation about the repositioning of gas lines underneath the river, underneath the Stillwater River. And it strikes me that we didn't have a voice of the Penobscot Nation in that conversation. So we should be more intentional about the way that we engage the communities that make up our town. That was my idea behind it.
And Jeff, and this is good. I'm happy with what you wrote, but it does implicate us in a way, and maybe Sophie can help with this too. I was just at a Maine Municipal legislative policy meeting, and there is a bill, LD 1626 right now, that involves tribal sovereignty, and the MMA, the Maine Municipal Association, is neither for nor against supporting this particular bill. It's been tabled until next session, but the point is that there are some municipalities that are against supporting the nation, and they're very vocal in our association and our municipal association. So there may come a time, and I actually supported this particular bill as an alternate for Tom. But it just reminded me that we are involved. We do get involved with the state when we do make a statement as a municipality that we recognize our tribe, and we recognize, the land and the waters, and that there may come a time when we do have to really dig in our heels or take a stand on a municipal level. That might be something that maybe the Maine municipality Association doesn't support. I don't think they won't support it, but they're not going to make a statement, neither for nor against. I mean, they're not going to make a statement for it or against it. But this is a big issue in the state right now. There's lots of allies. There's lots of people in Orono, and there may come a time that we do have to take a stand and say, this is our community. This is what we have pledged. This is the this is the proclamation. And I don't know. And Sophie, you can help me out with this. I don't know when that would come up, but I do know it has come up already. And I don't know what
So the town of Orono enjoys home rule authority, and it's really easy to get super focused in our home rule authority. And one of the things I really liked about the language that Jeff is proposing is that, number one, I don't see this as a proclamation. I see this as a resolution, because a resolution denotes further action, not just saying it's a good thing, but giving us guidance. And I think this document, where what it's saying, what you're declaring is not that you're giving up any authority anywhere, but rather that you're going to make sure that we look further afield than what we can do through our home rule authority. And I think that's really important. And I also think that it will guide, Cheryl, because we love the MMA and they do wonderful things for us, but they don't tell us what we should think or feel or how we should make these decisions. And so I do think that this is a really important statement, and I do think it's forward looking. And I think that it is something important that we'll be able to put in front of staff to make sure that we have a guide moving forward.
I agree with you, Sophie. I do like the language too, Jeff, and thank you for putting this together. I just wanted to kind of voice what kind of pushback we might have or might not have, but it has come up already. It's already come up that Orono might be in the minority sometimes on some of these municipal decisions, but that's okay. If that's okay, that's,
It's actually,
if people are ready for it, then that's okay with me.
it's Jeff, once again, great. I love it. Also, I think that as a community, when you really believe in something, you have to put teeth in it. And if we're a community who says this is what we believe, then we stand with our convictions of this is where we want to be. So I don't, personally, as an individual, like most things, if somebody else is saying that they don't agree, that's not our community. And I think we should stand like anybody should do. So Jeff, please continue. Sorry.
No, that's great. Our second action statement is to acknowledge the history and continued occupancy of Orono by members of the Penobscot Nation and the Wabanaki tribal nations. Right. I was afraid that a lot of times, I'm a history teacher, so we see these things as in the past, but that is not, of course, true. And the Penobscot Nation is not only our neighbor to the north, but the Penobscot people are our neighbors in our community. And I wanted to recognize that. And then the third action statement is to respect the wishes and prerogatives of the Penobscot Nation in the manner that Orono presents and represents symbols, images, messages relating to the Penobscot Nation, Chief Orono, and the shared history of the town, and the Penobscot Nation and Wabanaki tribal nations. And I think we have done to date a pretty good job at this. There would be, prior to my time on council, there were conversations about the symbols and imagery that we use in our town. We use them in consultation with the Penobscot Nation, and we have their approval. And I would like to think that we'll be thoughtful and respectful in the way that we'll continue to use them. And if their use becomes problematic at some point, that we would respect the wishes of the people whose symbols that we are, in a way appropriating. So, three really simple statements that I hope have some power to make this our acknowledgement more than just a nice feel-good statement, but make us a little bit more action-oriented with it. Yeah, Laura.
Yeah, I thank you for your work on this. I guess I I like it. I don't know what it fully means for us. And I feel like with this description, you've started to like between Cheryl, what you were describing around advocacy, and I get around the use of the chief ornographic on our town signage, but like, I guess I'm hungry for like, where does this take us? And like, so what's the, and more of like, what does this mean for us? And I don't know if that's this document, like per se, this might be the end of this document, but like how, who, where does this lead to us? Like I wouldn't, so I can read that like act in recognition and consultation around the lands and waters, but like, well, I guess what this could lead us to is, like I was thinking, the gas line under the river. Like, even if I said yes to that first now therefore statement, I wouldn't have thought during that review, oh my gosh, we need to be doing that consultation. And so I guess I think of our reading this quarter is around how to develop that decision-making tool. And Megan is going to draft some considerations. And so this is something that could be considered within that. Like, who else do we need to be consulting and considering as we make this decision? Because like, I think these are lovely. I just don't like, where does it go? I guess is my only like question or comment.
Sophie?
You want me to take a
Yeah,
stab at
please.
that?
Yes, please.
So I see this as maybe not even necessarily going, but rather underpinning and codifying a strongly held belief by the Orono Town Council that directs staff action and council action into the future until such time a council, I can't imagine, but would unacknowledge, right? I think that it is more about recognizing, Laura, in a very succinct way, this is a nod to our heritage and the way we should be behaving moving forward. And I see this land acknowledgement underpinning the second piece of work that I hope to work with Councillor Wingard and Councillor Robertson on, which is around flushing out more of the history of Orono for our website, because we are woefully underrepresenting a huge piece of our history. So I think this is a first step, but I don't think it's necessarily a big leap forward. I think instead it's going back and building some structure for where we already are, hopefully already are.
No, I think that's great. But I think it's where does this go? Well, it informs how we share our history on our website. Like that's like I'm thinking maybe too tangibly, like what do we now do with this? And that's a perfect example. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll say just sort of in closing with this, that I contemplating putting in like a list of actionable items, like near term action, medium term action, long term action. I didn't think I was the person to develop a list of actionable items for the entire community and the Penobscot Nation. Like, wow, you know. So I hope that, you know, as we go ahead with our DEI work, maybe we have people who are able to identify some of those kinds of issues. And then as we go ahead with our town council work, you know, we're just more thoughtful about the way that we approach these things. Yeah.
Lori, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. Well, one thing would be to have a land acknowledgement at the beginning of each of our meetings. And use, I can't see the top of it anymore because it's you're sharing. I tried to scroll and I was like, oh, it's his screen, not mine. So the something about these first three whereases, or some part of this might be what we say at the beginning of our meetings to acknowledge this shared, you know, this shared history and acknowledge the the Wabanaki people and the Penobscots. And so that might be one way to start, because then with each time that we gather, we have that intention is spoken of realizing how, we're on what land and whose people this lands belong to.
Yeah,
And again, I would say that that requires a consultation with the tribe.
Yes, Cheryl. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
no, I was going to echo what Cheryl said, and also I think I'm not sure how these things get operationalized in the council world, but maybe before I would be comfortable making a recommendation like that, I'd want to talk to the council chair and say, is this how we start meetings? What is the best way to both do the acknowledgement piece and to do the management piece? So I like the idea. If not read, at least maybe, in front of us in text, but I would say, should ask the Penobscot Nation what their preference is as well.
Jeff, can I ask a question about the stuff in when you wrote this? Were these people that you had providing you with how to really say it or make sure it's right? Are they from the Penobscot Nation, Wabanaki Nation?
So there is an organization that exists, they have a website and things to help municipalities craft land use ordinances. So I did read through that material, but I went to Darren Ranko, who is a member of the Penobscot Nation, but works at the university. And he's the person who drafted their initial land use acknowledgements or land acknowledgement statement as well. And so I brought what I had to Darren, and he was really helpful in pointing out the areas where, I was maybe a little too general. I told him how I wanted to make it distinct from the university statement. The university statement does not, for example, have any action steps in it. But I felt it was really important for us to have at least, that idea that we want to be not just thinking good thoughts, but doing good deeds. So, Darren helped me work through that language. And since the university language is largely his, we owe a pretty big debt to him. And then the other two commenters, John Bear Mitchell and John Banks, really helped me clean up the language a little bit. And John Banks in particular was really good about helping with the language that specifically identified which parts of the statement needed to be specific to the Penobscot people and which needed to be maybe more generally an acknowledgement of all tribal people in Maine. So, it's a group process. I would say Darren was the first person that I went to for help, but man, there were a lot of people involved.
Yeah, and I think generally the reason why I bring this up is because when I look and I kind of got a feel for the individuals who were involved in the process and really providing the insight, I would be really hesitant to even change any wording simply because it comes from the source. But Jeff, a definite throw out to you. It's amazing you did this. Your skills are great. But I would be hesitant to change anything on this document as it stands.
I guess my suggestion was an example of something that we could do moving forward. And of course, you'd need to communicate with whoever your mentors are on this process. And we would have to discuss that as a council, whether we would like to have an acknowledgement read or posted as part of our meetings. But that was my proposal, is that's one way to do something that's moving forward.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Laura?
Yeah, so I think it would be very helpful and awesome, Jeff, if you, through this process or thinking this through, had some action steps that council could make off of this or approaches. Like, I would personally find that helpful, and I feel like it leverages the work that you've done to date. And whether that then gets shared with the DEI committee that's coming up with a list of recommendations themselves, like, I think that would make sense to then filter through them. But I think it would be great. And it's also part of what we said as a council that we were going to do, was to kind of do some of the work. And if we have ideas for how to further that work, then it would be wonderful. And just as an update, and I had emailed it as well, but as far as work that the council was supposed to be delivering, as far as diversity, equity, inclusion, we have an updated calendar that acknowledges events throughout the year of different historical and religious and equity issues. And we also have a glossary, which were 2 deliverables that the council was supposed to follow up on. So by the middle of June, those will be available as well. But in addition to this, which is way early, thank you, Jeff, we are as a council continuing to move forward on this work.
Great, Jeff. Do you want to continue on?
I think I'm good. And, I appreciate the discussion. And I think, defer to Sophie, but I think the next step would be to bring this to council. Is that correct?
So I'm going to make a couple of suggestions, and it's not changing wording. However, I would suggest that we give this a resolution, so it is a formal council action, that the resolution, I'm going to ask Jeff to get to give me a title, and he and I can work through that, but it needs to be more than land acknowledgement. And I would like to make sure it's the right language to use. The other thing is, I think we need 4 whereas statements, not 3, because in resolution language, you tend not to have it tends to be whereas, now therefore. On to the next one. So I would put make your 4th paragraph down a whereas, comma.
Okay.
The town of Orono. And the other thing that I made change in the packet, but it was not in your original document, I took the liberty of, so when we talk about the town of Orono, big T means government. It is the council taking action. Little t means the community. So I changed all of the towns except for in the last paragraph to capitalize the T on town of Orono. And I just would love it if you could take a look at that to make sure that that's what you meant, Jeff, because if you mean the community, I don't want to turn it into the government and vice versa.
No, that's fine. I'll take a look at those and I'll make the changes. And if I have any questions, I'll just get back to you before we bring this to council.
That's awesome work. Thank you so much.
All right.
Great, Jeff. Thank you so much. You did a great job on this. I really appreciate all the hard work. Let's move on to number 5. Proposed changes to Municipal Review Committee, MRC, contracts that are classified, fundamental matters, and subject to member notification and review. Sophie, this is you.
This is me, and Mike Carroll is the executive director of MRC. He also is an Orono resident, and Bell just popped him up. So I don't know if he was planning to be on the panel, but he's gonna join us. So I gave a lot of background here. The first thing I want to do is, in the interest of full transparency, I serve on the board of the Municipal Review Committee. The Municipal Review Committee is a member organization. So when people talk about what MRC is doing, we're representing our members. We have 105 municipal members. Orono is one of them. I am a volunteer. So even though for a while everybody was saying I got paid $100,000 for that work, I wish, it is a wholly volunteer. However, there are definitely 2 distinct hats that I wear, because when I serve on the MRC board, I'm representing all members. When I serve as your town manager, I only care about Orono. And so you're going to have to bear with me as we go through this conversation, because we're probably going to end up putting on hats and taking off hats to kind of make this work. I don't know how much detail I need to give, so I'm going to start And if I'm getting too far in the weeds, raise your hand and we can fly through. But so the town is required by state law to have a place that municipal solid waste can be disposed of. We don't necessarily have to take it there. We don't have to pay for curbside collection, but we have to have a place that our residents can dispose of their municipal solid waste. For many, many years, dating back to 1998, even before that in the 80s, the towns got together, and I'm going to spare you all of the gory details, but they got together, and what resulted was the creation of the Penobscot Energy Recovery Corporation, where we incinerated our trash. We entered in when that operation got up and running. We were supposed to be able to deliver our trash at $10 a ton, and the wheels came off the bus, as they often do in new endeavors, and the towns all had to come together, and we didn't have money to give to help the endeavor work. Instead, we had to guarantee tonnage, because that guaranteed tonnage is what allowed the PERC to get a buyer, get financing, and reconstitute all of the contracts. So that in 1998, we have a second amended and restated contract. Town of Orono was an initial member of the MRC when it started. MRC kind of came in and pulled the towns all together, got the contracts reconstituted, and we entered into these 20-year agreements with PERC. Each town had its own agreement with PERC, and we were required to deliver our trash there. When the agreements ended in 2018, the partnership that created the entity, which the municipalities ended up with a 26% ownership share of, was slated to dissolve. So I've served on the MRC board for 16 years. I'm in my 16th year. And I got to go through the process of trying to renegotiate the partnership deal between the municipalities and PERC. And through that process, what we discovered is that the methodology of having an entity that you had to feed the trash. We named it Feed the Monster. You had to have trash go in order to make the money to make it a reasonable cost. We were given numbers for tip fee, which at that point we were able to net down to something around the neighborhood of $45 a ton. We were given numbers of $110 and $115 a ton to dispose of waste, but still requiring guaranteed actual tonnage. So the MRC board shifted gears at that point. We did not see that as a viable option to continue as we had been for two reasons, the cost, but also we really wanted to find a scalable method of processing waste that did not require us to feed the monster. That if we could reduce, reuse, recycle, we wanted that to be a prime outcome. So we all, the MRC went out on a nationwide search. Actually, it was a global search. We had some international interest, but we went out on a global search for new technology. We knew that MRFs and incineration were actually old technology in the world of municipal solid waste management. And we vetted all sorts of options. We came to this option of Fiberite, which was recycling amped up, promising a very high recycling diversion rate, and taking all of the organics and processing them to a value-added fuel or product. And we went around. I spent one summer driving all over the state of Maine to all sorts of town meetings to talk about what we were offering. And so what MRC was offering at that point was a 15-year contract to dispose of your waste at a facility. We had a master waste supply agreement where MRC was the one on the hook for the relationship with Fiber Right. So it was no longer individual municipal contracts. The municipalities were contracting with MRC. And then MRC was managing those contracts with the Fiber Right facility, which then became Coastal Resources of Maine, is what it ultimately constituted itself as. So we went through that whole process. We lost a significant number of members who decided they didn't want to go with risk and unproven, building a new facility. They wanted to go to something that had already been up and running. So we have some that went to Eco Maine, which is an incineration facility. We had others that didn't really value the environment piece of the MRC mission and went directly to landfill instead. But we ended up with approximately 102 tons of waste that has been, it's no longer a guaranteed actual tonnage. It's an estimated tonnage that we are trying to give each year. We negotiated contracts that allowed for a rebate system after the facility got up and running and was performing at a certain level. Essentially, once it got to this level, the MRC would get dividends for revenues above that, and MRC controls that money, but it actually is the members' money. So every dollar that we come in gets parsed out on paper for each of the members. MRC does not have its own money. It was quite a process to get that far, but we got everybody signed up. Fiber Right got its financing, and just as we wanted to, we went through the permitting process, which was not a walk in the park. It was not an easy process. It was very long. And after the permits were issued and everybody was ready to break ground, a lawsuit was filed by one of Coastal's competitors in this region that wanted to stop the project. And that lawsuit went for a very long time, and it delayed a lot, and it also was incredibly costly for Coastal to fight. So you have a company that was looking to put a project in and ended up spending some of its reserves or its fund to fight a lawsuit. So what happened is, as we brought the facility online, or they brought the facility online, there were things, of course, that have to happen through the course of bringing a new facility online. And ultimately, they had eaten so far into their funds that when it came time to run through the lean part of a startup, which is going to be there for any startup, they simply did not have enough capitalization to continue. So they started operating. They met all of our performance tests. So they were, and in the spring of 2019, there we go. The years, it's COVID, got the COVID brain. In 2019, in the spring of 2019, they were recycling at 62%.
The last month that they operated, they were just over 60%.
So we know the technology is working. However, they just didn't have the money to continue. They were going in the hole. And part of what made them go in the hole is that they had to get permits that they weren't getting at the beginning so that they could take their value-added products and actually sell them, which would give them revenue, which would be part of their pro forma. Instead, they were having to pay big bucks to dispose of them as waste as opposed to make money from them. So they also, and I think this is pretty public, the MRC board was not enthused because they also did not have an on-site manager. And I would argue some of the MRC's biggest concern was the fact that they were not really managing their resources effectively. So MRC floated them a $1.5 million loan in hopes of being able to bridge to additional financing. That financing fell through and they ended up closing the plant. Since the plant has been closed, MRC has ensured that we have a place to dispose of our waste. Sometimes in that process, it has unfortunately been at Juniper Ridge landfill as part of a disposal a waste swap agreement. So waste that would have otherwise gone into JRL stops at Waste Management in Norwich Walk, and we tip ton for ton. The communities that are close to JRL can tip in at JRL. As soon as we were able to meet contractual obligations and reach an agreement with PERC, which is still up and running, we have been incinerating our waste at PERC. So what we have, the town, as of June 30 of 2019, had over $889,000 stake in this enterprise. And the goal of the MRC board has been to get this enterprise back up and running. So I say we, it's not me, it's Mike. Mike has been running double time to try to get this up and going. So MRC does not own the plant. We own the land upon which the plant was built. There is a site lease agreement which gives the MRC certain control and obligations regarding, so it's a landlord-tenant relationship. The MRC also has a master waste supply agreement. So you have all these municipalities that have contracted with MRC to get rid of the waste. MRC has contracted with, had contracted with Coastal to dispose of that waste through the master waste supply agreement. So while we don't have an ownership stake in the plant and we can't sell it, what we have is the fact that we have to consent to the assignment of those two agreements, as well as placing the assignment of Coastal's interest in the DEP and other permits that Mike has been working to leverage to try to meet some member needs. Yes, Laura?
Yeah, there's been a couple times that you've said we, and I'm not totally sure who you mean.
Right now, I'm MRC, the MRC
Okay.
Board of Directors.
Okay.
Okay.
And when you said, and I think you might have said town, but I think you meant we by the MRC board, saying that you were in for like almost 900,000.
No, I meant 600,000, 689,000, and I meant
Okay.
the town.
The town. Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Thank you.
MRC overall has about $7 million invested in this at this point. Mike, is that a good number?
It's just under 7 million with the infrastructure and the road and all that.
So we are here because much like when the voters of Orono amended the charter to create a town council, when they did that process, they were very clear on what powers they were retaining and what powers belong to council, right? So if you look at the charter, there's not a lot that people can review or object to formally that council does. It's a very narrow window. When the MRC reconstituted itself with its new membership back in 2018, it created a brand new set of bylaws that all the members were signing on to. And those bylaws give the MRC Board of Directors a basket of authorities. One of those baskets of authorities are to manage these contracts and to negotiate or renegotiate these contracts. You can make changes in the contracts. The MRC board can make changes in the contracts, except here's the provision. On fundamental matters, which are outlined in the bylaws, which think the really important ones, the MRC board is required to give notice to its members of the change, which is what was in the background material that you received. You received an overview of that. So we have to give an overview of what is going to change if it addresses a fundamental matter, and we have to give the members 60 days. In that 60 days, they have an opportunity to review the fundamental change, talk to Mike, talk to board members, and if they are not in agreement with the change, and if they can convince a large enough group of members to come together to call a meeting, there would be a public meeting where this was vetted and voted on by the membership. So let's talk about what that level of that critical mass that you require to have a public meeting, public member meeting. That member meeting requires 60,000 tons. So in MRC world, every time, oh, it's 30 days, sorry, 30 days, not 60 days. So MRC world is dictated by members having votes that relate to the number of tons that they tip. So their investment in the plant is based on prorated by their estimated tonnage. When the members elect board members, those votes are weighted based on their tonnage. So as a point of comparison, the town of Orono has 3,750 tons of estimated tonnage, of estimated waste. City of Bangor has 28,000 tons of estimated waste. Bar Harbor is in the neighborhood of 15,000 tons of estimated waste. So that gives you kind of a sense of you need to pull many people together. And the idea behind that, back when the bylaws were written, is that we wanted to make sure that a significant number of members that were coming together to make change, that it wasn't just a few people creating this member meeting to essentially overrule the board that has done all the work. But if the board was really heading off into left field, it should be pretty easy to get 60,000 of our 105,000 tons. Does that, 102,000 tons, sorry. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we look at the fundamental matters, and they are laid out, but the big issue here is if we could have simply assigned the contracts as written, that is what MRC probably would have done. In order to make the deal work, we had to renegotiate certain terms. MRC board had to renegotiate certain terms of that contract. So I want to just say there's been a lot in the newspaper about the potential buyer, DTE. Some of it is simply not true. Others of it is perhaps is true, but honestly is irrelevant to the MRC, the question in front of the MRC board. So MRC is in a position where we're either going to get the plant up and running and perhaps recoup our investment and also have a place for people to take their trash that's environmentally friendly, or we are going to be back at square zero. The bondholders have brought DTE to the table. So the bondholders are the ones that put the money up for Fiber Right to create the plant. Fiber Right put the plant up as collateral. When Fiber Right ran out of money and were not paying the bondholders have stepped in and are now trying to negotiate the sale of the plant. So DTE is the buyer that the bondholders have brought to the table. MRC can dance with the partner that was brought to the table, or we can take our toys and go home. Taking our toys and going home essentially means flushing a $7 million, likely flushing most of a $7 million investment and putting us back to square one, perhaps being able to dispose at another facility, but likely ending up in landfill until we come up with plan B. So that's kind of where the MRC was at when we negotiated these deals. Is that a fair statement, Mike? Okay. So when we look at the changes in the contract, the first is, yes?
And I have a brief of, if you would like, I have a brief of the 4 fundamental matters. So it's up to you.
I bet you can breeze right through that in just minutes.
So thank you, Sophie. So there's 4 fundamental matters and 2 actually go together, duplicate themselves. Number 1 is the purchase, the option to purchase the land. In the current lease agreement, the MRC land could be purchased at the end of its initial term by CRM if MRC decided not to extend the term. DET would like to see that opportunity come sooner. In this type of acquisition, lenders want the option of the land ownership as part of the collateral. To obtain financing, DTE needs to show the lender a path to land ownership. This is just an option they are requesting to be added to the agreement. The land sale would not happen until DET shows long-term reliability, stable operations of the Hamden facility without bypass for 9 months consecutive. In that 9 months, 2 of those months need to include July and August. So we know it wouldn't happen this year, and with the ramp up, it probably wouldn't happen next year. So if that opportunity were to come about, they would probably be, I'm guessing, 2 to 5 years out for that opportunity. Number 2, rebates. In the current agreement, rebates were based on CRM performance. This was on gross revenues, and they had to hit just over 16 million per year before rebates would even kick in. With recycling markets fluctuating and the unknowns in the waste industry, it was never clear when the MRC rebates would have started or even if they ever would have happened or been achieved. We wanted to change the rebate language to a simple formula in a plan called a shared tipping fee. And this way you're not feeding the monster and it doesn't look like we're trying to feed the monster. The shared tipping fee would be for $1.50 reimbursement to the MRC for every ton that we put into the plant. 3 and 4 are kind of the same, but they have to be 2 different issues. And basically what it is an extension of the 2 agreements. So we are currently about 1.5 years into the 2 current agreements. The 2 current agreements are the lease agreement and the waste supply agreement. The finance opportunity has a chance for them to recoup their financial commitment. The purchaser and the financer would like to see the clock reset on these. Like I said, we're about 1.5 years into them, so we didn't see a real big issue with that. They like to reset it back to the initial 15-year term. Both contracts started on, I believe it was November 1st of 2019 when commercial operations was obtained. So what they're asking is to change those two agreements back to an initial 15-year term. Those are the four fundamental matters.
Sophie and Mike, do you want to finish your presentation first? Or do you want to?
Yeah, sure. We'll have a moment to actually
I've got some
questions.
some questions that we've kind of skipped
No,
over.
So, sure, we'll get to those. Let's let.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Terry.
So I think, so the issue is, and the reason I'm bringing this to you, I don't know that this goes to every town council, but where I am a member of the MRC board, I want to make sure that the town of Orono governing body knows that we have received this notice of fundamental matters and understands what they are. And you have a choice. You can either let this just ride, or you can make the MRC aware that you want to throw your 3,750 tons behind a membership meeting. And so that's why we're here today. And I don't know if you need more of a presentation. I could talk literally, I could talk about this for hours.
No, I don't think we need a presentation. However, so I'm going to open this up for conversation, and I'm glad, Michael, thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate that. So we're going to open up a conversation. I'm going to duck out for a brief moment, but Cheryl, you can start.
So I've been following this, as you both know, as Mike and Sophie both know, and here's some concerns that I have. Fiber right was an unproven technology. It wasn't, I think Sophie started to say it, but it was an unproven technology and it didn't work. And what ended up happening was that they left us, they went into bankruptcy, short story, and we've been landfilling. PERC went into electrical something. And so when we had started diverting to PERC, and then now we're landfilling again. My concern, well, if we're back at PERC, that means that they're back up and running, but it was April, right? The month of April.
20 days. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the month of April. The fundamental matters letter is dated May 3rd, and it says 30 days from May 3rd. Well, June 3rd is what, in 2 weeks? That doesn't really give us 30 days. This is the first time that I've seen the letter, the fundamental matters or changes subject to special voting rights. So I don't know, we don't really have 30 days to make a decision about whether or not we want to do this. I would like to see, I didn't see in any of this contract 9 months consecutive, has to have 9 months consecutive, and that may or may not happen for 3 to 5 years. That isn't written down anywhere in anything that I read. Unless you could point me to a page, point me to a page number.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a concern. That's a concern as well. My biggest concern, Mike and Sophie as MRC person or town councilor, I don't know how you want to be, town manager. My biggest concern is that I'm not sure what has been reported that is not true about DTE, but they have a horrible reputation. My biggest concern is that we're going to end up, no matter what we do, we're going to end up again bypassing to Juniper Ridge with a company that doesn't know what they're doing, that has been called out for lying basically about who's on their board, where their facilities are operating, and called out in a way that's like, seriously, like we seriously want to be dealing with these people. So that's number one. And here we're back down to money and environment. What is it exactly that we really want to do? I would like to see a concrete definition of stable operations, because it's throughout this document, right? Minimal downtime. The last event with fiber right, there was a temporary, well, we're only going to temporarily bypass to Juniper Ridge. And then it ended up as I don't know how long, a year at least. And the word temporary was never defined. It could never be defined. We had to take it to, DEP to try to define what is temporary. So I don't see any of that concrete language. Minimal downtime, stable operations. What does it look like and what does it mean exactly for our municipalities?
Cheryl, as you ask these things, let them have time to actually answer your questions.
Well,
as
I'm
we-
just kind of lumping it. I'm going to
Okay.
lump it so then I don't have to talk anymore. If that's okay. And so I'll
It's fine,
just
I just
lump it
want
all.
to make sure they answer your questions.
Well, I think they can. I think I don't think that Sophie and Mike are hearing anything that they haven't heard before. So that is a concern. Okay. And then there's some things in the agreement that it says, I said on page 22, I have it all listed on page 22, continues 9 months of stable operation with minimal downtime, which must include peak months of July and August. Doesn't say anything about 9 consecutive months of being operational. And it doesn't say anything about, I think I already said that anyway. So a proven track record. So we don't have I don't know what a proven track record is. There's another concern that I have, and that is the MRC having no oversight. I think it's on page, I think I wrote it down, 21 or 20 or 26, where the MRC doesn't have any oversight about any other agreements that DTE makes with outside entities. Do you know what I'm talking about? 26, maybe 27.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, that's a concern of mine because because this company is so disreputable that what kind of agreements they have said repeatedly on MRC meetings that they don't use sludge, that they're not going to use any of that stuff, but on their website they say that they do. So there's a lot of things that they say that are, they're just, I feel like we're going to end up in the exact same place that we are right now, and that we will be just one of 115 municipalities that is just landfilling again. So I don't understand why we're in this position and why there's no why we're in this position.
Sophie, start answering.
All right, I'm gonna take a stab at this, and
Okay.
I'm probably gonna lose it all, but let me work through it, Cheryl, if you would.
Okay.
First of all, I'm not gonna get into a debate about fiberite being unproven technology.
Okay.
You and I are going to have to just agree to disagree on that, because that is a master's class all in of itself, and MRC worked very hard with the University of Maine on peer reviews, and when the plant closed, it was working. So a couple of things in the way you're going through, and I'm going to let Mike talk about DTE because he has worked with them, but I don't know that MRC has ever said that they really like DTE and that they think they're an awesome company. I think what they've said is we've done due diligence to vet the process. The other thing to remember is DTE has their own technology. You're absolutely right. They have technology that they have used in other plants. That is not the plant that they're buying here. They are buying a plant that has its own setup that Fiberite put together, that they are now charged with running. So you're right. They might use sludge in their operation in a different state. Here, this plant is not set up to take sludge, and the permit doesn't allow for it. So anything they're going to do to change, they have to go through the permitting process, which MRC is not going to support changes that don't make sense. And we saw that a lot with PERC, right? So the other thing that happened, so what you're looking at, I think, Cheryl, are the summaries that I gave you, when you're saying page 21, page 22, are you talking about the summaries in the packet? So those are just summaries. What buttresses those, or what feeds those, are probably close to 300 pages, Mike, of contracts. I have been through those contracts. These are simply summaries. So when we talk about minimal downtime, I remember seeing a definition for that. When we talk about, when you talk about, gee, you don't like the fact that MRC doesn't have oversight, one of the things that the board was able to negotiate through this process, and by the board, I mean Mike, was the ability to actually reconstitute that operations and oversight committee like we had at PERC, where we do now have a seat at the table around operations. Unlike before, we actually have to approve their operating plan. And when they deviate from that operating plan, they have to come back and get approval from the MRC board. So we have more oversight with DTE than we ever had with Coastal. The other thing that, when you say you think we're going to be right back in the same position, while I had faith that the technology would work based on all of the research that the MRC board did and the peer review with Hemant Pence's team on the technology, I can't tell you that you're not right. I can't argue that we're not potentially going to be in a position where DTE comes in and doesn't capitalize enough, and we're right in the same position. That is a reality, as is the potential that the reality is DTE comes in with all of the funding that they have, are able to make the changes that make this plant thrive and prosper, and we're recycling at the 80% that Fiber Right sold to us 6 years ago, right? I mean, so we don't know what the future brings. What I do know is that going into this sale, consenting for the assignment of these contracts supports the sale. The sale makes the MRC, which, read that not as an entity, but as our members, including the town of Orono, whole on all the money that we have outlaid with regard to the closure and limping along. So it's the loan that we paid, it's all of the funds that we paid out for property taxes and things that we were not supposed to have to pay for. So we now have money in the bank to be able to more effectively deal with what is coming at us moving forward. If we don't consent to the sale today, then we know we're out all of the money, and we know that we're going to have to come up with another plan. The other thing that this sale does, that as the treasurer of MRC, I am most comfortable with, is if everything shuts down because they can't make it work, they are required to hold performance bonds and other sureties that the MRC can tap when we're in this position, so that if we have to pivot, we're using our members' money on a solution as opposed to band-aiding and trying to get us through to the next place. Have I answered some of those questions? And I
Yes,
think,
and I don't think that piece of it, I didn't know that piece of it, that the financial piece of it. I think that piece of it hasn't really been made public. My last, and you said something that made me remember that I'm questioning the automatic 2-year extension for the master waste supply agreement. If we don't know that this company is going to do what they say that we're going to do, and we're just kind of going into it and just crossing fingers, why are we giving them an extension of an agreement without knowing? Why aren't we waiting until they have proven with their 9 months that they have proven that they are going to do what they say they're going to do, and then give them the extension?
so the reason for that is very simple. When financiers are looking at supporting this project, they are looking at a reasonable amount of time where they're not going to be paid, because startups don't tend to make money at the beginning. And then they need time to get a return on investment. So the reason for the initial 15-year term is because that's what the bondholders required for the material coming into, the guarantee of the material coming into the plant, so that they could do their pro forma and have reasonable assurance they're going to get their money back. Same thing here. So the difference is, if you don't want to extend the 2 years and instead you know it's going to be 13-year deal, then they're going to have to change something within the terms of the pro forma. So we're going to pay a whole lot more up front so that they can still get the return on the investment. They're going to have to work that in one way or the other. The other piece I would tell you is that if all of this falls apart in year 3 and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're not processing our waste, and they're not meeting the performance standards, then MRC will be in a position to be able to call default on the contract and go to the next option, if that is what it chooses to do. So the contract term really is what I think matters to us, Cheryl, if it's working, not if it's not working.
And so is there an exit strategy then? Because I didn't see an exit strategy in this either. Like, is it 3 years? I mean, are we giving them 3 years to be,
So,
you know, to do what they say that we're going to do? My concern again is always bypass and landfill and all the things that we don't want to do, because it's the last place on the hierarchy.
Yeah, so they really want our land. They really want to be able to buy the land. So they have an incentive to get up and get operating fairly quickly, so that they can then put us in the position of having to go back to our members and ask for approval of an option and a sale of the property. There is nothing written that says it's going to be 3 years. I will tell you, as a board member, Cheryl, I am constantly trying to weigh the risk of the members, the return on our investment, the environmental concerns. And as a board member, I'm not going to get tied into a deadline of when this does or doesn't work. I will say that if it became apparent that this wasn't going to get up and running again, I don't think the MRC board has a whole lot of patience to wait around and try, go. I think we would pivot to plan B at that point. And I don't know, Mike, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just have a couple things. Cheryl, what I think will also help you is there's a table on our website that really goes into detail structuring this deal that will go into some of these dollar amounts for you. So there's another table outside of the notices that we sent that talks about each fundamental matter and goes over some of the financial aspects of it. And I just want to mirror some things that Sophie said. We know who DTE is. We know exactly what we've seen and what we've researched. But remember, they're coming into a plant that already exists. Nobody's going to walk into this plant and be able to operate and is going to have experience with Fibrite technology. So what fundamental matters are what needs to be changed in the 2 assigned agreements. But there's lots that we negotiated knowing who our dance partner was going to be, like the bond. So they have to put up a bond. So that's part of the deal. We've already gone through the whole operational plan, and the operational plan includes, they have experienced people on their staff. Their vice president of operation was with Cabana, and he's going to move here. He's already looking for homes, and he's moved his office here. We have about 30 of the former members that have already been interviewed at the plant that were running the plant. And these are technical people. These are maintenance people. These are people that were on the back end, the wet end, and that type of thing. So there's experience coming into the plant, and we've assured that in these deals. So there's a lot more into the deals than just the fundamental matters that we didn't have to list for the changes, but we've made sure to put as much protection in there for the members as possible. And when it comes, no, but this is millions and millions and millions of dollars. We can't go into the dollar amount. Nobody's going to come in and spend this kind of money on a 3-year deal. But we have those controls. The contracts are assigned. So we have the controls, and by having the monthly meetings, which is part of the negotiation, we can go in and call the faults. We can go in and say, make these changes and those type of things. So those are other things we've put into it. Remember, you made a good point that we were able to negotiate and get the waste to PERC. But PERC also, because of not on them, but because of the Versant maintenance, they had to shut down. And then the waste automatically had to go to landfill. We need this plan up and going, and the diversion rate that this plan achieved. I mean, you folks do curbside recycling. So you're getting another 50, let's just say the permit minimum, because we know they met the permit minimum because DEP allowed them the permits, which was 50% diversion. So you're getting another 50% out of your MSW, and you're already doing a sort in your recycling. So this is a great option for Orono. And we know exactly who our partner is. We're not naive to that. I mean, the MRC has been around for over 20 years, and it's made up of, I mean, our members, we have town managers of the 3rd largest city in Bangor. We have people with financial backgrounds. I have 20 years in the waste industry. Our consultant's been in the energy and gas and waste for over 20 years. We have a big infrastructure. So we're not naive to who's coming in and what we're doing on this deal.
So I want to open it up also, but first, Sophie, I want to say you are like a plethora of knowledge, so I appreciate that. So Laura, you want to go next?
Yeah, so Sophie, you obviously have played an outsized role in this compared to the amount of trash that, the small percentage of trash that Orono is contributing to this large operation. So do you have a sense whether the large contributors, whether it's Bangor or you mentioned Bar Harbor, which is smaller but large, are they happy with this deal?
So I don't know that anybody is like over the moon ecstatic with this deal. However, Mike started calling members from largest down to smallest, and I think he's down to like people who have 400 tons. I think he told me, as compared to, the 28,000. The only member that has indicated to us at this point that they might call for a vote is Bar Harbor. The rest have been pretty easygoing. In Bar Harbor, it's interesting because the people that MRC had been working with, the staff, didn't see it coming at all. This happened at their council level. So I'm not seeing, and the other thing I will say is I'm the longest serving member of the MRC board right now, and people do in fact have my cell number, and when things at MRC go sideways, my phone blows up. I have not heard from any members directly about this, and I would have expected to.
So I guess from my perspective, I mean, we're just so deep into this, and trying to dissect whatever has happened is just unfortunate. And so I feel like this is the best course that we can take right now to move forward, to even attempt to recoup where we're at. And so we try it.
It's actually, Laura,
my takeaway.
it's the only course that we have. It's not the best and it's not the worst. It's the only one right now.
So
Well, that's not what I gathered, but anyway, okay. I stand with where I think we just go with this.
word usage. So Jeff or Lori, you want to chime in? Either or?
Well, can I ask maybe Sophie a question? It seems that some municipalities are greenlighting the process. One municipality like Bar Harbor has said that they may question it. And then I was just doing some quick reading earlier. There's a couple small towns like Trenton, for example, took no position. So we are not obligated to approve or disapprove. This is really informative on our, this is just informational for us.
So if you had, so you would need to take affirmative action, Jeff. And so I brought this to you because if you wanted to move it forward, you have every right to do that. And also to make sure you know what I know about trash.
Right. Okay. So I think, I need to be educated more about it, but I'm with Laura. I think we have to trust the MRC is looking out for its constituent members at this point. I don't see any reason to call for opposition or a vote. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I just want to clarify that I did not say that my green light was because I'm trusting the MRC, and it's nothing personal, Mike, but just because of history, I feel like just where we're at today, we're in deep, like we need to move forward. So that's.
Lori, do you have anything to add?
I really appreciate all the work that Sophie's done over the years for the MRC, and Mike, it's a pleasure to meet you and hear you talk about this. I have a long history of dealing with waste because I used to work as a consultant and my company would go to landfills and I was never a big fan, and was glad when the hierarchy came out and said, this is really not a great idea to landfill. And of course we have a long history with many people in our town who do not want our waste to go to Juniper Ridge for all of the challenges that Juniper Ridge poses. And it sounds like this is the only way forward without losing all the money we've invested. So I appreciate, I've been on the council for now 3.5 years, and I've known that Sophie's played an important role in the MRC. And this is so many details that were shared with us today about this deal. It's the most we've heard so far that I recall, and I really appreciate you getting into the weeds for us. I'm glad that you're sharing with us. So what you're saying is that we have the option to say, whoa, we want to do something different, but you're also advising, or it sounds like you're advising us like this is the way to go so that we do not lose we have the best chance of recouping our cash that we've invested, and also finding a waste solution that is closer to what our goal would be. So yeah, so I thank you very much for that. I look forward to the work that Cheryl and her committee are doing, because one of the things I was impressed with over 2 decades ago when I moved to Maine was that the legislature had said, we're going to improve our state's management of waste, and we're going to recycle so much stuff. I don't remember what the number was, but it was impressive to me from having lived in other states. And it turns out it was on paper, because they didn't really, as a state, didn't do a lot. When they said no new landfills, they didn't do a lot to figure out what we're really going to do. And the bill that's in now to say that the people who bring containers into our state have to figure out what to do with them, or make them recyclable, make them biodegradable. That kind of thing should have happened 20 years ago. We'd have a lot less waste we'd have to be processing right now. So I appreciate all the work you're doing. Thanks for including us. And I'm with Laura on, I guess this is what we need to do.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So Sophie, for me personally, the one item that was through this was that when they were talking about the option of, like, if somebody creates towns decide to go do their own thing, I was concerned that if we even went that route, how many years would it actually take to have that change happen? And what do you do with the rubbish in the interim?
So I don't know. I do know that I think the future solid waste plan that would work based on our current infrastructure, Terry, involves in my opinion, relationships between this Hamden facility that MRC is invested in, and PERC. I think that there is place for both of those entities, even though when we set up the new chapter of trash, we set it up as a very adversarial relationship. So I do think that there is a place for PERC and this facility to work side by side. Can municipalities go to PERC if this deal were to fall apart? The town could call default eventually at some point of our contract with MRC. We might be able to negotiate a deal with PERC, maybe. However, in order to meet its new normal, PERC has totally redesigned its process, and its capacity is much more limited than it was back prior to 2018. So I don't know that we could go in that direction. I can tell you that we started to plan for what was going to happen in 2018 in 2012, 2011, 2012. Well, actually, I remember I was still in Brownville, so it would have been 2010, 2011. So it took us a long time to get to this place. I would also suggest it took a lot more than $689,000, which is probably not. I haven't seen the audited financial statements, but based on the checks that I've been signing, I would guess if this deal didn't go through, Orono's share is probably going to be closer to $200,000 or $300,000 as opposed to the $800,000 that we would walk away with.
And I have just, and while we've got Mike here, a couple more questions. So coming through the legislature is zero waste. What are the chances, or what are our options if Orono, I mean, I think that, I don't want to say that it's MRC's responsibility to get rid of our waste. I totally believe that we need to be throwing away less things. We just need to, consumerism is out of control, and we just need to be proactive in what we do as a community and as a municipality. But if we did decide, like, I'm chairing an environment committee, I'd like to talk about what it means for Orono to go zero waste and to start really doing some kind of campaigning so that we're not throwing away so much stuff, so we don't have this problem. And then coming down the pike is the recycling, circular economy, the circular recycling economy, which I'm researching right now, and I haven't got a handle on it right now. But what happens to us in this contract if down the road, because we've signed on to a 15-year contract, we want to reduce the tonnage that we throw away every day? Are we locked into something that we can't do something new because of this 15-year contract that we have?
So when MRC negotiated the original contract, Cheryl, part of that was that we absolutely, outside of the organics, which is part of that is the material that is most desirable when you're talking about the value-added pieces of this process. Outside of the organics, the MRC, we want communities to do what they want with regard to recycling and reduction and all of those things. If we got to a point where so any ton that flows into the plant counts towards our tonnage, if I remember this correctly. So it doesn't even have to be an MRC community that sends that ton, but we need to have at least 102,000 tons. So there is absolutely nothing that would stop us from instituting more recycling, as long as the town was not sponsoring an organics program that removed organics from the waste stream.
So Sophie, I want to kind of try to wrap this up. We're kind of going a little deep in this. And we obviously a lot of questions that can come up from this. So I think the general consensus is of the council, at least of the committee, is that we're wanting to kind of move forward. So what does this move on to also to the next council meeting, or how does this work? I don't know. Do we just say that we're
So this is, you get to decide, the committee gets to decide how they want it to work. From my perspective, giving notice, giving the committee the opportunity to decide if you wanted to take affirmative action, you could recommend that to council. And we could talk about that with a special meeting on Monday night to meet deadlines. I mean, that's not a big deal. But if you are, the consensus really appears, or the majority appear to want to just let this play out, then if I don't need to take affirmative action, I don't need any action from council. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't my decision. I wanted to make it your decision.
okay? Sure, Laura?
Well, I just thought this was a normal committee decision that was then moving on to council. So I was feeling like, hey, let's move this on to council. But like, if this is a committee decision, we can take, all the time that we need as a committee.
I'm thinking that I'm just going on a limb saying that 4 of us feel like let's move this forward. Cheryl has still got some reserves from an understandably so. So I don't know, we can keep going around and asking questions, but at the end of this, at some point we have to say like, let's just move it. So am I correct in saying that, Cheryl? I don't want to step on.
I think that with the provision that we have the opportunity to do other things, that the municipality isn't locked into, this was a big question and concern for me, that we can do something creative and innovative, not with our composting. I really would like to do a composting thing, but that's part of fiber rights technology. I feel more comfortable if we could implement some other kind of environmentally friendly way to handle our waste as a municipality and as a community, in that regard. And that can happen in the next couple of years. I was very concerned about getting locked into a 15-year term from a company that we don't know can even do what they say they can do, with no exit strategy. And that concerns me. So, I mean, we don't have any other choice. There's nothing else. There's nothing else out there except for PERC. That's incineration, and that's only one step over landfilling. So it's not even a good second option. So,
Okay.
Go with it.
All right.
We'll have to go with it and see what happens.
So I think we're all feeling like, Sophie, let's go with this. Yes, we're going with the MRC recommendation, and from there, does that make sense? Great. So anything else with this, Sophie? Are we good? Okay, great. So let's just move on to our last thing, is the town manager's report.
So I have just a couple of things. The first, I just needed.
Wait, Sophie, I'm sorry. I forgot to say goodbye to Michael. Bye, Michael.
That's all right. I talk to him every day, so I'll let him know. I needed some feedback because we have these wonderful gateway signs, which actually is what started our whole conversation, which is why we could jump on the Penobscot Nation land acknowledgement, because we have these gateway signs that use the town seal, which is Chief Orono, on them. And it is a year and a half ago now. We brought a rebranded logo to council, not for the town seal and the town, like on our trucks and the things that denote the government operations, but rather for marketing, gateway signs, website, that kind of stuff, that did not have the town seal. And it was based on trying to bring some outdoor recreation stuff, and also concern that had been raised around the using Native American symbols as mascots, and where were we with that, and what was okay and what wasn't okay. And so when that happened, there was a 4-3 vote on council to proceed with the new signage. And I couldn't sleep when I went home that night, because a 4-3 vote on how you present the town just doesn't seem like something you should have a 4-3 vote on. So we brought it back and we started some other conversation, and the former council chair began conversations with Darren Ronco and John Bear Mitchell to kind of figure out how we wanted to, what the nation felt about Chief Orono being a symbol for us and how we could reasonably use it. And then COVID hit and everything stopped. So the reason I'm bringing this up is not because I want to revisit the logo today. That is not what this is about. The issue is that COVID, one of the silver linings in the COVID cloud was that the way we educated people about COVID was to go print these temporary vinyl signs that we then nailed to the falling apart gateway signs that look horrible. And so I am in this position to give you a sense. A gateway sign is going to cost a couple $1,000s a piece. So this is not something that I want to create and then recreate later. So I'd like to try to patch us through. And my thought was, we have high school graduation coming up in the next month. We have ordered Orono graduate signs to cover the gateway signs. So I'd like to do that, but I would also like to order some temporary vinyl welcome to Orono signs that are not any logo, just something very generic that we can put up and get us through to the next discussion.
That actually sounds good. I think it'll be to kind of pause for a moment, given that that was a pretty lengthy conversation before about what we all felt. I think with two fresh counselor eyes, when we go back to look at this, maybe we'll see something that we weren't seeing, or
and it might be something that we can get some assistance with the DEI group. And I think we're making some really nice connections, counselor to nation connections. But I just, if I pull it all down, they are falling apart. And I just don't think it is a good step forward for the community. Laura,
No,
I think had a question.
great ideas. I think it's a great idea. And I think that as we all go back and revisit it in the future, it is very important to know that what our signage is going to be what we want the people to know or see Orono as. So yes, I totally agree with you. Does everybody agree with having some temporary signs?
Okay. I mean, they're going to look like temporary signs, just like these ones did. And that's why I wanted to have the conversation. But I think the other option would be to pull all the gateway signs and stack them up until we put new ones in. And I kind of don't want to do that, but we could.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
I know Laura had a question. I don't know if she still does.
No, it's fine.
Okay. So the
Can I
other
ask-
thing
Can I ask a
Oh.
quick question, Sophie? Do we have money still in the budget? It's not in our budget this year, but do we have, because we're doing budget talks, do we have money for those signs still?
Yeah, so they're about $310 a piece. So
Okay.
that's gonna be
No, not
that
the
from-
vinyl ones, our
the
our
big
gateway.
ones?
Yeah, our gateway ones. Okay,
No, not right now.
right.
But I have thoughts.
Okay.
So, the first thing I need to do is council needs to decide how it wants to promote itself, and then we can go from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to let you know that this is National Public Works Week. So if you see a public works person, and we're including WPCF in that, please say thank you and make them blush. It's always fun. I did that today. We had a little barbecue they had a little barbecue that I got invited to, and so that was fun. A reminder that June 8th is the school referendum election. And absentees are available, so people can vote. And the other thing, so on Monday night, we have a budget workshop. I chatted with Council Chair Perry, and I'm just going to pack up the financials and ship them out to folks. I also am working with staff to try to have a memo around the budget for folks sometime next week. I had asked for people's thoughts about what they wanted to revisit, either for further discussion or for cuts. I've gotten information back from 4 folks. Even if you don't have anything, if you just let me know so that I know I'm not cutting your voice off. I want to make sure if you've got things you want to talk about that we add them. On Monday night, we're going to talk about general government. So that is my office, IT, finance, the town clerk's office, debt, general assistance, elections, and miscellaneous. You gotta love that. I think we call it other. One thing I'd like you to think about after we get done with the general government discussion, I am hoping to help you guys walk through a discussion where we can create some general goals. So here is what I'm looking for. If we want, this is kind of the message, because I think we've had individuals talking and not a group kind of agreement, a group discussion about what the goal is. If your goal is to reach a certain mill rate or a certain amount of extra tax or no extra tax, or if it's $1 that a target that we're trying to reach, I need to know, I need to leave on Monday night with some sense of what that target is. And if it involves a number that is less than what you're going to get on the summary sheets this weekend, I need to understand where you are comfortable seeing those cuts come from. Not specifics, but is it public safety? Is it public services? Is it public infrastructure? Is it, where would kind of help me target so I can bring you back options when we meet on the 3rd. If you want to provide the same level of service and don't want to see an increase in the tax rate, I think you are giving me an impossible task. So I think you really need to think about if I want to drop the draw on taxes from what is projected right now, how much am I looking? What's my target? And where are the areas that you're comfortable? I have the areas, I know the areas that are listed that I'm getting from at least a little more than half the council right now, but I really need, I'm gonna be asking you for group guidance, because right now it's very scattered. And everybody has something that they are attached to, which makes sense because in the community, different people value different things. So I'm just wanted to give you a heads up for the question I'm going to ask you, so it doesn't feel like a gotcha moment.
Sophie, just so you have information, I'm really am struggling with, and if there's any way to kind of throw a projection for next year, I don't know if that's doable. but we've had conversations about how the contractual agreements, unions and stuff are going to kind of go. That's actually messing with my mind in the sense of like, how do I actually look at this and say, like, do I propose something that next year I'm gonna have to propose another thing that's gonna be a big hit? Is there any way to kind of get a general sense of what those increases may look like next year?
Yeah, I had a conversation about that with the council chair today, and let me see what I can do, because one of the things we don't want to do, Terry, is for me to sit here and have a conversation about in public session about our bargaining position, or to give the answer at the end of the day. I mean, we want to be kind of careful about that. But I do have a sense, and I do have some concerns, and part of, I think, either a confidential memo or an executive session, I need to come back to you, because I have some concerns about even this year's contractual obligation in one of the units. So
Yeah, I just think it's important to me personally that to really know where we're at. I mean, when I look at things that are cut, yeah, I can go look and cut 1,000, 10,000, whatever. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about minimal things like that. We're going to be talking about things that are some big, hard hitting stuff.
yeah, so one of the things I am gonna suggest, and I think I had this conversation briefly with Councilor Wingard earlier today, is, when the new council came together, and even a little bit before that, and it's a very active want to do things council. That's new for me. I'm used to having a council that would send me ideas and they'd percolate up, but I always had a really good sense of where council was, and we kind of spoke shorthand back and forth. I didn't have to do a lot of explaining because everybody had been through it so many times. And in this budget process, I don't think we've done a great job of explaining some things, which is why I hope to get a memo back out to people. But also, it in the past, when council, right now, I feel like council's going for the trying to find the magic bullet. And in the past, what council has done is given me targets where I come back with options that council can agree with, not agree with, discuss, and send me in another direction. But it's really tough when you look at that, you don't really understand what that, for example, that whacker means in the grand scheme of things, because Rob might have 2 other suggestions for things that you should think about before you think about that, just as an example. So I think in my desire to make sure that I was not pulling council to where I wanted to be, I don't think I've given you the same level of support that I have in previous years. So I'm going to try to rectify that on Monday night and try to give you some more options, because people are making some of the suggestions that are coming. There's nothing wrong with anything anybody's saying, but it's clear that they're not necessarily understanding or valuing using the same set of values that we have historically used. And maybe it's because we need to change, which is fine, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Sophie, I just wanted to say too that one of the things that I'm challenged with, because I hardly ever look at cuts, but I look at revenue, and like, we don't know with all of these all this federal money and state money and money getting funneled through, and the school board budget. I mean, the school is a huge chunk of our taxes. Do we, I mean, I imagine June 8th, and I imagine it's probably been published and I haven't seen it yet, but is it reflecting the money that's coming to them?
So the school board got published a budget that
Right.
showed $152,000 decrease from last year. And
Okay.
that was realizing some additional funds that came through in general all-purpose aid to education.
Mhm.
The after that was published, the governor's change package came out, and that's the same change package that moved revenue sharing to 4.5%. It also moved state aid to education 55%. Based upon what I saw on the DOE, Department of Education website, for Orono, that is projected to be about $309,000 increase over what they had originally gotten. I did not attend the school budget meeting that happened on the 18th. However, I did have an in and talked with somebody who contacted me. And what was said is, if that passes,
Mhm.
and the enabling legislation allows them to pass through the additional funds as tax relief, that the school board would be looking at doing that. Now, I don't know if it's a dollar for dollar pass through, or if they would have other priority for some and pass other through. I don't know the context of that statement, but the school has less time to work with than the town does, so we can deal with the legislature taking action at the last, towards closer to the end of the fiscal year, a little easier than the school can.
Those are the big unknowns for me, is like what we have coming in.
The other thing that I am not ready to talk publicly about is I'm starting to see some of the reval information. And if everybody was floating at the same rate up, then the argument would be, well, here's the pie got bigger, but if you need more money, everybody's going to pay more money anyway. So what does the mill rate matter? So value here with a mill rate here, if you're doing this, the tax bill stays the same, right? However, some of the numbers indicate that there is some significant additional value that is not across the board, that may allow for some dropping of the mill rate that won't impact, especially because council has, I think you care about everybody, but I know you're especially sensitive to our residential taxpayers. I know you care about business taxpayers and all of that, but I think there is some sensitivity there. So if there is some value that got left on the table by a couple of entities, then I think that value is something that you can really kind of pick up a little bit differently. And so I'm working to kind of figure out how to present that in a way that doesn't just capture all the value for you. And we're not quite ready to do that. We're going to start, the letter should go out to taxpayers in the next couple of weeks with their new numbers. It's going to take me a little bit longer because I got to write a cover letter so people don't throw it away and they'll open it because it's coming from the town.
Thank you,
So,
Sophie.
I think that value, when we started the conversation at the beginning, I said, I don't want to play with value because we're all going to go up but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, in which case I think you can take some advantage of additional value that.
Laura?
Yeah, I just was gonna say that I'm not gonna be there on Monday from 5 to 6 p.m. So 2, I feel like your instructions for what you're looking for potential areas to not cut, but flag or whatever tonight is different than what I walked away with from last week. And so I don't know if I should rethink what I sent. I mean, and at another point, like I've said what I've said. And so there it is.
Yeah. So from my perspective, the list that you gave me has specific items that I'm going to be able to capture and put into a chart for you guys that we'll talk about. That's what the memo is. It's here's the item, here's the rationale, here are the the impacts and here's what you'd save, right? I mean, that's the kind of the goal. What I'm looking for, and I think you put it in your email to me about what your goal was. I saw very clearly what your goal is. And that I think is what I'm looking for from council, because if everybody is looking for us to not significantly raise taxes and can give me a target of somewhere between 0 and 800,000, then I can work towards that. And I don't think it forecloses anything. I also think if you drop in at 6 o'clock, we're probably going to be just about starting that conversation. So I don't think you'll miss it.
So Sophie, I think that's a really good point, is that, you know, like last year when we did this, it was like, we did not want to raise taxes. We were very succinct and like, this is what we wanted. I think like my whole perspective on this is that we're entering into a different realm now that's going to be, from years past, really different in the sense like I don't want to call it nickel and diming things to be a better budget limit, but I think we have to look at, like, there's big hard numbers coming and we live in a space that everybody wants it all and we can't afford it all. And we're gonna have to have these really hard conversations. So I appreciate that you're telling us and putting us on notice that to provide where that threshold is going to be for each of us, and then kind of figure out where that center point is, and we can all work to be at that spot. So thank you. Anything additionally? Laura?
Can I say one more thing? You talked about some of the ideas that came up were like different values from before prior councils. And like, that to me is really important. It's something that we need to collectively have a conversation about, because at certain times values do change, maybe should change. And like, I don't want to look at that as a bad thing, I guess.
I don't think of it as a bad thing, Laura. I think of it as staff has these guiding ways that would, the environment around us is what leads us to make the recommendations that we make. What we're hearing is different than what we have heard before. I'm not saying it's bad or it shouldn't happen. It just, I'm not going to go into my bag of tricks and pull out the same recommendations I would before without having a conversation with council. That's all I was trying to get to.
Great. Well, thank you guys. I guess we're done. Well, I'll say we'll sign off and enjoy your meals and have a good evening.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank you.